I used to tell people my brother ruined my life. For a while I even believed it. I told my friends that Miles had abandoned our family. I told my husband that my older brother had let the bank take the only stable home I'd ever had. I told my parents that he had changed after he got a good job, that money had made him cold, that he had forgotten where he came from. The story sounded convincing when I said it that way. My brother stopped paying the house loan. The bank took the property. My husband and I had to pack everything we owned into garbage bags and cheap cardboard boxes. My parents ended up in a tiny rental on the other side of town. I cried on the floor of a house I had never paid for and called Miles selfish until my throat hurt. Then he finally answered one of my messages. Not a call. Not a long explanation. Just one text. I bought that house for Mom and Dad. Not for you. You didn't raise me. At the time I thought that was cruel. Now I think it may have been the first honest thing anyone in my family had said in years. My name is Tara. I'm 25, though for most of my life people treated me like I was much younger. My brother Miles is 3 years older than me. He was always the serious one, the one with a plan, the one our parents bragged about when they wanted to sound proud and pressured when they wanted something from him. I was the other one. Not the bad kid exactly. At least that's not how anyone said it. I was creative. I was sensitive. I was still finding my way. If I failed a class, Mom said school just wasn't designed for everyone. If I quit a job after 2 weeks, Dad said I had probably been treated unfairly. If I forgot to pay someone back, it became a misunderstanding. If Miles made one mistake, it became a family meeting. When we were kids, I didn't see any of that as unfair. Kids don't usually question comfort when it benefits them. I just knew Miles was expected to bring home good grades, get scholarships, study something useful, and eventually make enough money to help the family breathe. Those were my dad's words. He said them like Miles had been born with a contract already signed. I meanwhile was allowed to drift. I dropped out of community college after 1 semester. I said the classes were boring, but the truth was I hated being measured. I hated deadlines. I hated sitting in a room full of people who seemed to know what they wanted, while I was still waiting for life to feel easier. My parents never really pushed me. Mom would rub my back and say, "You'll figure it out when you're ready." Dad would nod and add, "Not everybody's path looks the same." But Miles never got that softness. When he was 17, Dad would sit with him at the kitchen table and go through college costs like a military plan. Mom cried over loan papers. They told him they were putting everything they had into his future. They said he had one real chance to lift himself up and maybe one day lift all of us with him. I remember sitting on the couch during those conversations, pretending to watch TV while listening to every word. I didn't feel guilty. I felt relieved. Nobody was looking at me like that. Nobody expected me to become the answer to the family's problems. Miles went to a tech program instead of a traditional university. It was expensive enough to scare my parents, but practical enough to make Dad call it a smart investment. That word stuck with me. Investment. Not gift. Not support. Investment. Back then I thought that meant Miles owed them. It didn't occur to me that parents shouldn't treat their child's future like a retirement account. After Miles graduated, he got hired by a software company. Not some millionaire overnight thing, but solid. Real benefits, decent salary, enough for my parents to talk about him like he had won the lottery. He moved into an apartment with 2 roommates because he wanted to save. He drove an old car. He bought groceries in bulk. He didn't go out much. He sent money home sometimes. Every time he did, Mom would mention it at dinner like proof that things were finally turning around. Miles helped with the electric bill this month. Miles sent a little extra for Dad's car repair. Miles said he can cover the insurance if we're short. It became normal so quickly that I stopped hearing it as generosity. It was just what Miles did. He worked hard and our family needed help, so the money flowed in our direction. Simple. Looking back, that was probably where the damage really started. Not with the house. Not with the bank. Not even when I moved in. It started when all of us got used to Miles being responsible for problems he didn't create. My parents had always rented. Some places were fine. Others were cramped or noisy or badly maintained. Dad changed jobs often enough that stability was always just out of reach. Mom worked part-time whenever she could, though she had a way of making every inconvenience sound like a crisis. A rent increase wasn't just a rent increase. It was a sign the world was punishing them. A broken heater wasn't just a broken heater. It was proof they had never been allowed to rest. So when they started talking about wanting a house, none of us were surprised. First, it was subtle. Mom would sigh while scrolling through listings online. Dad would mention how embarrassing it was to still be paying rent at his age. They'd talk about noisy neighbors, landlords, inspections, moving trucks. They'd say things like, "It must be nice for people who have somewhere permanent." Miles would get quiet during those conversations. I noticed. I just didn't care enough to wonder what it felt like for him. One Sunday dinner, Dad finally said it straight out. I remember because I was there, sitting across from Miles, picking at mashed potatoes while Mom poured iced tea into chipped glasses. Dad leaned back and said, "You know, son, your mother and I have been thinking. We've done everything we could to give you a start. Maybe it's time you helped us finally settle down." Miles blinked. "What do you mean?" Mom smiled gently, the way she did when she wanted something but wanted to look humble about it. "A small house. Nothing fancy. Just a place where we don't have to worry about rent going up every year." Miles actually laughed, but it was nervous. "Mom, I can barely afford my own life right now." Dad's face tightened. "You're doing better than any of us ever did at your age. That doesn't mean I can buy a house." "You don't have to do it tomorrow," Mom said. "Just think about it." I watched Miles look down at his plate. His ears had gone red. He always got like that when he was cornered. I could have said something. I could have told my parents they were asking too much. Instead, I sat there and let them talk. Part of me even thought they were right. Miles had a career. He had the education they paid for. He was the one who made it out. Wasn't this how family worked? For months after that, the house came up constantly. Mom sent him listings. Dad complained about rent every time Miles called. They reminded him in small ways and large ones that they had sacrificed for him, that they had gone without, that they had believed in him when money was tight. Miles pushed back at first, then less, then not at all. When he finally bought the house, my parents acted like they had been rescued from a burning building. It wasn't huge. 3 bedrooms, 1 story, old but clean with a little yard and a narrow driveway. The kitchen needed work. The hallway carpet had seen better days. But to my parents it was a palace. Mom cried the day they got the keys. Dad hugged Miles so hard his glasses almost fell off. Everyone took pictures in front of the porch. I posted one online with a caption about family blessings. Even though I had not contributed a single dollar. People commented heart emojis. Mom replied to everyone. Miles stood at the edge of the photos with a strained smile. At the time I thought he was just tired. For a few months the house really did seem like a good thing. My parents were happier. Mom bought curtains. Dad started talking about building shelves. They had neighbors who waved. They hosted relatives and made sure everyone knew Miles had made it possible. I heard the story so many times it became polished. Our son bought us a home. He wanted us to finally have peace. He never forgot everything we did for him. The last part always made Miles look away. I came over a lot. First just for dinner. Then weekends. Then whenever things with my roommates got tense, which was often. I was living with 2 girls I knew from an old job. And they were less patient than my parents. They expected rent on time. They expected dishes to be washed. They got annoyed when my boyfriend Derek stayed over too much. They used words like boundaries and respect, which I considered dramatic at the time. Mom said I could always come home if I needed a break. The thing was, the house felt like home. Not technically mine, sure, but family home. That was how I saw it. I didn't think of the loan. I didn't think of Miles wiring money every month while he still shared an apartment. I didn't think of the fact that he had no bedroom there, no key on his own keychain, no real say in what happened inside. I thought, my parents live here, so I belong here too. That belief made everything after it feel reasonable. When my roommate situation finally blew up, I packed 2 duffel bags and went to my parents' place for a few days. That was what I told everyone. Few days. Maybe a week. Just until I figured things out. Mom welcomed me like I had escaped a disaster. Dad carried my bags to the spare room. Nobody asked how long I planned to stay. Nobody mentioned rent. Nobody told me I should apologize to my roommates or find another place quickly. Instead, Mom said, "You need stability, honey. You can't make good decisions when you're constantly stressed." I loved that sentence because it made me feel less responsible. A few days became 2 weeks. 2 weeks became a month. My clothes filled the closet. My makeup spread across the bathroom counter. Derek started coming over more often, then staying most nights. I began answering the door like I lived there because in every way that mattered to me I did. Then Miles showed up unannounced. I was in pajamas holding a bowl of cereal when I opened the front door and saw him on the porch. For a second I felt irritated before I felt embarrassed. That alone should tell you how far gone I was. "Oh," I said. "What are you doing here?" His expression changed. Not dramatically. Miles was never dramatic. But something in his face closed. "I came to see Mom and Dad. They went to the store." He looked past me into the living room. Derek's hoodie was on the couch. My shoes were by the hallway. There were takeout containers on the coffee table and laundry folded over a chair. It looked nothing like my parents' neat little home anymore. It looked like mine. Miles stepped inside slowly. "You staying here now?" he asked. I shrugged. "Just for a while. Mom and Dad don't mind." He nodded once, but his jaw was tight. "Right." I knew he was upset, and instead of feeling guilty I got defensive. In my head he was judging me. He always had that effect on me, even when he didn't say much. His life made mine look messy. His restraint made my excuses sound weak. It was easier to resent him than to examine myself. When Mom and Dad came back, the air turned awkward. Miles asked how long I'd been staying there. Mom said I was helping around the house, which was generous. Dad said I had gone through a rough patch and needed family support. Miles didn't raise his voice, but I could tell he was angry. "This house was supposed to be for you too," he said. Mom looked hurt. "She's our daughter." "I didn't say she wasn't." "She needs somewhere safe," Dad added. Miles stared at him. "And I'm paying for that?" Nobody answered directly. I remember sitting at the table that night while Mom served dinner like nothing had happened. She kept praising me for helping. I had wiped the counters once and picked up groceries with Dad's money. Still, she talked like I was the reason the house felt alive. Dad said it was good for me to have routine. Derek nodded along because he was not stupid enough to argue against free shelter. Miles barely ate. I thought he was being cold. Now I understand he was realizing the house he had bought for his parents was being quietly handed to me, while everyone expected him to smile. Things shifted after that visit, though not in the way they should have. My parents didn't ask me to leave. They didn't ask me to pay. They didn't sit down with Miles and apologize. Instead, they started talking about me needing a real chance. Mom said it first while we were folding towels. "You know, your father and I have been thinking. Maybe this place makes more sense for you right now." I laughed because I thought she meant I could stay a little longer. Then Dad explained that they were considering moving into a smaller rental nearby. He said the house was more space than they needed. He said they wanted a fresh start. He said I could stay in the house full time, and it would help me and Derek build a stable life. I should have asked, "What about Miles?" Instead I asked, "Are you serious?" Mom smiled. "Of course. You need this more than we do." There it was. The phrase that had saved me from responsibility my whole life. You need this. Not you earned this. Not you can afford this. Not you've shown you can handle it. Just need. As if needing something gave me a claim to it. My parents moved out 2 weeks later. They didn't tell Miles until after it was done. I knew that was wrong. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. I knew there was a reason Mom avoided calling him while we moved boxes. I knew there was a reason Dad said, "Let's get settled first, then explain." I knew because my stomach felt tight the entire day, and I kept snapping at Derek for small things. But guilt is easy to smother when you're getting what you want. For the first time I had a whole house. A bedroom with space on both sides of the bed. A kitchen where nobody complained about my dishes except my mother when she visited. A yard Derek said he could fix up. A driveway. A porch. Neighbors who assumed we were responsible adults. I started imagining a future there. Maybe Derek and I would get married properly, not just at the courthouse like we'd discussed. Maybe we'd have a baby. Maybe I'd start some home business online. Maybe everything would finally click because I had the one thing I always claimed I lacked: stability. When Mom finally told Miles, the explosion was not loud, at least not from his side. I only heard pieces because she put him on speaker for Dad, not realizing I was in the hallway. "You moved out?" Miles asked. "We thought it made sense," Mom said carefully. "For who?" "For everyone. Tara needs the house more right now." There was a pause. Then Miles said, "I bought that house for you and Dad." Dad jumped in. "And we appreciate that. But your sister's struggling. You're doing well. We figured you'd understand." "She's family," Dad said. "The first month I paid late. The second month I paid half. The third month Derek's truck needed repairs, and I told Mom I couldn't swing it. She said she understood." Dad said not to stress. Miles didn't call me directly, and I was grateful because I didn't want to hear his voice. I assumed he would keep paying anyway. That was the foundation of my entire life. Somebody would keep paying anyway. Bills arrived. I stacked them on the entryway table. Some were addressed to Miles, some to my parents. I opened a few, panicked, then shoved them into a drawer. There were notices I didn't understand and didn't try hard to understand. Words like delinquent and default appeared, but I convinced myself those were warnings, not consequences. Mom said Miles was probably just trying to scare us. Dad said banks sent dramatic letters all the time. Derek said, "Your brother's not going to let his credit get wrecked over this." That made sense to me. Miles was careful. Miles planned everything. Miles would never allow a mess to touch his name. We were counting on the very responsibility we mocked him for. Then the calls started. First they went to my parents, then to Miles, then somehow to the house. I answered once and hung up when the woman on the line mentioned the loan. I told myself it wasn't my problem because my name wasn't on anything. That part was true legally. Morally, it was cowardice. A few weeks later, Mom came over looking pale. Dad was with her, and neither of them wanted coffee, which was how I knew something was seriously wrong. "Miles has stopped paying," Mom said. I stared at her. Stopped. Dad rubbed his forehead. "He says he warned us. He can't just do that." "He can," Dad said, and for once he sounded old. Panic rose in me, hot and immediate. Not guilt. Not yet. Fear. I thought about the bedroom, the yard, the way I had started saying my house when talking to friends. I thought about losing the proof that my life was finally becoming something. So I called Miles. Straight to voicemail. I texted him. No answer. I called again from Derek's phone. Nothing. Mom called. Dad called. They left messages full of outrage and disappointment. I sent one that still makes me cringe when I think about it. "You're really going to make your own sister homeless because of money?" He didn't respond. Over the next 2 months, the world I had built out of someone else's sacrifice came apart piece by piece. Letters became deadlines. Deadlines became legal notices. A man came to the door with papers, and I yelled at him like he had personally caused the problem. Derek punched the wall in the hallway and left a dent we never fixed. Mom cried at the kitchen table. Dad kept saying he would talk sense into Miles, but Miles had blocked everyone. At some point I started calling from unknown numbers. So did Mom. Dad borrowed a friend's phone once. Derek wanted to drive to Miles's apartment, but we didn't know exactly where he lived anymore. That detail hit me hard. My brother had paid for the roof over my head, and I didn't even know his address. The house was taken back by the bank. That sentence sounds clean. It was not clean. It was humiliating. It was slow. It was strangers assessing rooms where I had imagined raising children. It was packing while angry, crying, blaming everyone except myself. It was Derek asking where we were supposed to go, as if I had hidden a backup house somewhere. It was Mom saying Miles had destroyed the family. It was Dad muttering that no son of his should behave that way. And it was me, standing in the kitchen on the last day, realizing I had no argument that didn't collapse under one question. Who paid for this? Not me. Not Derek. Not my parents anymore. Miles. The brother I had called selfish had carried all of us until his back finally gave out. Then, when he put the weight down, we screamed because we hit the ground. The house sold at auction. I don't know who bought it. I never looked. For a while I couldn't drive past that neighborhood without feeling sick. My parents moved into a small rental outside town. 1 bedroom, thin walls, bad parking. Mom acted like it was exile. Dad became quieter. They still blamed Miles, but their anger had a desperate edge, like they needed him to be the villain or else they would have to look at themselves. Derek and I moved in with one of his cousins for 6 weeks, which was about 5 weeks longer than the cousin wanted us there. Then Derek left to take a job 2 counties over and clear his head. We are still technically married, but I don't know what to call a marriage that only worked when someone else was paying for the house around it. I got a second job. Not because I discovered discipline overnight. Because I had no choice. The first time I paid rent with money I earned, I expected to feel proud. Mostly I felt angry. Angry that it was so hard. Angry that nobody had prepared me. Angry that Miles seemed to be doing fine while the rest of us struggled. Then one night after a double shift, I sat in my car outside my studio apartment and cried so hard I couldn't unlock the door. The apartment was tiny. The carpet smelled like old smoke. The fridge hummed too loudly. There was no porch, no spare room, no yard for some imaginary future. But it was mine because I paid for it. Nobody could take it from me because my brother got tired. Nobody could hold it over my head because my parents had guilt them into it. That was the first time I understood what Miles might have wanted all along. Not revenge. Not control. Just a life that belonged to him. For months I kept drafting messages to him. Some were apologies. Some were accusations dressed up as apologies. Some started with "I know you're hurt," and turned into "but you have to understand." I deleted them all. Because the more honest I became, the shorter the message got. "I'm sorry we used you." That was the whole thing. We used his guilt. We used his ambition. We used the fact that he loved our parents. We used his fear of being ungrateful. We used every sacrifice they had made for him as a chain around his neck. Then acted shocked when he finally broke it. And me? I used him too. I hid behind Mom and Dad, but I was not a child. I knew he was paying. I knew I wasn't. I knew the house had not been offered to me by the person actually carrying the cost. I knew Derek and I were living there because everyone assumed Miles would absorb the unfairness like he always had. I let myself become the fragile one because fragile people are protected. I let Miles be the capable one because capable people are exploited. That is not something I enjoy admitting. There are still days when the old part of me flares up. When rent is due and my feet ache and Mom calls to complain about her apartment, I feel that familiar bitterness. I think Miles could have kept helping. He had the money. He could have saved us. Then another voice answers, quieter but harder to ignore. Why should he have had to? My parents still don't speak to him, though I suspect that bothers them more than they admit. They talk about him like he betrayed us. They say success changed him. They say he forgot family. But they never mention the months he paid for a house he couldn't live in. They never mention the extra money they redirected without telling him. They never mention that they moved out and handed me the keys like his consent was a minor detail. I used to join in when they talked that way. Now I usually stay silent. Silence is not courage, I know. It is just the first thing I've managed. I heard through a cousin that Miles has his own apartment now. A small place downtown, nothing flashy. He's saving for a home of his own. When I heard that, my first reaction was jealousy, then shame, then something almost like relief. He got out. Maybe that should hurt, but it doesn't anymore. Not the way it used to. If anything, I think someone in our family needed to prove escape was possible. I don't know if I'll ever send him the apology. Part of me thinks he deserves one. Another part thinks leaving him alone may be the first decent thing I can do. Apologies can be selfish when they are really requests for forgiveness, and I have asked enough from him already. So I'm writing this instead, not because it fixes anything, but because I'm tired of telling the version where I'm the victim. My brother did not ruin my life. He stopped funding the lie that I didn't have to build one. The house was never mine. It wasn't my parents to give away either, not really. It was a symbol of everything we expected Miles to provide while calling it love, security, comfort, a future, a cushion between us and the consequences of our own choices. When that cushion disappeared, I called it cruelty. Now I call it a boundary. I wish I had learned that word before my brother had to lose so much to teach it to us.